This is TrackDown, the shakedown show where, from the racetrack, we talk with Corvette Racing's Doug Feehan or SRT Viper's Tommy Kendall, but we're not at the racetrack. You know what? Let's just put up some pictures of the racetrack, Lime Rock, and we'll pretend we're there. And am I pissed? No, not really. But X or not, I'm a racer. And like a racer, when something happens, we just put our head down and move forward. So today, from the lovely studio with pictures of the racetrack, I'm going to be talking to Tommy Kendall via Skype because he's not at the racetrack either. A lot of racing action coming up. Tommy, fresh from the Le Mans 24 where the SRT Viper made their debut. We'll chat about that a little bit. We'll probably talk about things like tires in F1. When we come back, it's TrackDown, on Shakedown, on Drive, from the studio. Let's just call this Desk Down. Jesus. So Tommy Kendall, thank you for joining us. I've already explained to the audience why TrackDown, which is supposed to be you and I meeting trackside, is not happening at Lime Rock Park, but we're here doing this via Skype. So it's all good, right?
Well, it is, you know, and it is 4th of July. And so since the 93 is being ably driven by Jonathan and Kuno, I figured I would stay home and exercise. Exercise my right to celebrate the 4th exactly how I choose.
So, and you also know TrackDown is really not you and I just talking about SRT Viper. We'll talk about Le Mans a little bit, but really just kind of catching up on the topics of the day in racing because I value your opinion and I know our viewers want to hear more than just what the hell I'm thinking. So why don't we start with probably the bigger topic in racing, that whole F1 Pirelli Tire thing that's been going on. Obviously, I'm sure you've read all the comments about what Pirelli's saying and what the drivers are saying. From a driver's perspective, though, how do you approach something like this? Is it purely safety first, or is it just a cacophony of factors that kind of screw with everyone's head and helmet?
If it was purely safety first, every single one of them would have pulled into the pit lane and parked. So it's clearly not safety first. But you know, you're caught between a rock and a hard spot as a driver because it really is. When something like that's going on, I remember a race in GTP at Road Atlanta in '92 where we had a series of failures and both Nissans went through massive end-over-end accidents, and they ended up cutting that race short. But the reality is none of them will pull off the track voluntarily. So you're kind of in a tough spot, which is why you see them react the way they do and are vocal about some of what's going on between races.
You know, it's tough for us to comment about the technical stuff, but I think you know enough from obviously being with teams in pro racing. So we've got two schools of comment going on here. One, we've got Pirelli, who I think have come out publicly and said, hey, teams, you're just not using the tires correctly. Extreme camber, tire pressures, swapping tires. And I'm going to ask you about that to make sure I understand that. And then the teams, I think led by Mercedes, frankly, kind of weirdly, saying, thank you, Pirelli. We need more guidance on how to use these tires. How should I interpret all this?
With a big grain of salt, like a bunch of poker players telling you what they have in their hand, I guess. You know, it's one of those things. What was amazing to watch was how quickly they adjusted. You saw Red Bull doing a two pound pressure increase, which when you set pressures, because the tire is becoming even more so in F1 with that small wheel and the huge sidewall. You know, the spring rate of the tire affects basically the ride height of the car and the angle of the whole car, which is a wing. And so usually they're talking 1/10 of a pound can be felt. To go up 2 pounds, they had to tell Seb ahead of time. They were probably in an area they weren't real familiar with, but to watch them adjust on the fly like that. Yeah. And the reality is they probably were running outside of the recommended. So you saw that in NASCAR a while ago. The guys were running basically flat left front tires because it's faster. And so again, if safety is a concern, but a bigger sin than being unsafe is being slow. And so, you know, you can give them guidelines, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to save them from themselves to some degree.
And it's funny because there are two things you mentioned. One's going to come with a question, but everyone wants to bag on NASCAR. But NASCAR laid down some very rigid parameters to keep everyone within some window so we don't outbeat ourselves, for lack of a better awkwardly word. The second thing is I was at Watkins Glen this weekend, and I'm looking at the tires, the Continental tires, and they've got a sticker on it that kind of said at X pounds, I think it was like 30 pounds, this tire was rated at 800 pound spring rate. In effect, is that telling me what the inflation does in terms of that third spring, if you will?
Yeah, and it's hard to overstate how important that is. You know, in Formula One, we know that aero is everything. And so a tenth of a pound affects it enough where the dynamic rake, basically the angle that whole car and all of its downforce making apparatus are going through the air, it's the angle of attack of the wing is changed. And so they work hard to understand that. And so you throw something like this into the equation, even when there's no variables, there's some people that do it better than others and they're the ones that win. But, you know, it's incredibly complex. But that's exactly what that sticker is, because, you know, because the teams were getting inconsistencies, and I don't care who you are, there's the best tire makers and there's some that aren't as good. Even the best ones are going to have some variance between what they make. The better ones have less variance, but teams complaining about this set of tires didn't behave anything like the other ones. So that spring rate is they're saying, okay, this actual tire was inflated to this pressure and then tested. It's not a standard sticker for every tire of that type. They tested that tire.
So the last one, and I'm going to show my age because I can't remember. My Atlantic team used to swap tires side to side, and I can't recall why they were doing that. Whether it was, quite honestly, to take a tire that had kind of been bedded in and get more bite with the way the tire had come up the first time around, or what. And these F1 teams are swapping tires. And Pirelli said they weren't really forbidding it, but now they're saying that's a bad thing. We were surprised. Why do you do that?
Well, I don't know why they're doing it, other than they've concluded there's some advantage, whether it's an advantage in grip, whether it's an advantage in consistency, whether it's an advantage in degradation. I'm not quite sure why they're doing it, but it's safe to say it's not an accident. They didn't just accidentally mount them on the wrong side. So
to put a cap on this tire thing, obviously everyone's making moves to correct, but from a driver's standpoint, you don't want tires to start affecting who's the champion. I mean, is the simple answer really just let the professionals do their tire job, or is it more testing? I mean, what would you be asking for if you were in this spot as a driver?
Well, as a driver, you just want to know that they're not going to go down. But you know, one of the things, it's never black and white. It's never simple. And you saw there was a move to change the construction of the tires earlier, and the teams that really have a handle on it, the Renaults of the world and so forth, said we don't want to do that.
Yep.
And the way the regulations are laid down, you can't. You could say, well, hey, it's safer, and they could say, well, we've done our job better. Why should everybody else be bailed out on this? So it really is a kind of a trick box. And some of the teams that seem to be having more trouble with it, you know, might go and you can negotiate and say, you know what, we're going to give the teams that have a better handle on it and are resisting the change more test days. But there's two sides to every story, and you know, it's easy to say, you know, it reminds me of that race at Indy where half of the teams pulled out. They wanted them to change the course, and the Bridgestone guys at the time, which weren't having any trouble, says, why should we be penalized? And they said no. So it's easy to say they should do this, but there's so much more at stake and invested and so forth. It's not a simple answer. But I mean, what the drivers want is the drivers want confidence that they're not going to fail.
So here comes the big picture question. All of this stuff seems to be a microcosm of the bigger debate of is it all about the show or is it all about the sport? And I'm going to kind of ask you point blank, you know, where's your head at? Is it really matter more that this be great entertainment, this thing we do called racing, or is there an aspect of it that it's a sport and may the best guy win?
Well, I think the purity of that question went out the window a long time ago when they started tweaking stuff. So, I mean, it's where's that line? And I think, you know, you look at global rallycross and watching the X Games. I mean, that stuff, those guys are just hammering on each other, and it's exciting. But by the same token, if you get to the point where there's so much damage that it's too expensive for guys to run based on the return, you know, it kind of sorts itself out. If road race guys or IndyCar guys, for that matter, or Formula One guys destroyed as many cars as they destroy in NASCAR, the budgets would come under serious pressure. But NASCAR's cars, you know, there's enough, and that's part of the spectacle that overall it works for them. So, I mean, that's something the market kind of decides. And I think you need smart people. You know, Bill France Jr., I was always impressed with him, where he didn't say a lot. He took a lot of input, and he made he was taking everyone, all of the constituents' input, and ultimately making his best decision on what was best for all of them. And some would be better for some of them than others, but on whole, he was kind of guiding it forward. And obviously, results show he did it to great effect. You just hope that you have people in charge that have enough wisdom to be smarter. It's kind of reminds me of parents, and the racers are like kids. And you always say, I want this, I want this, I want this, or fans say, I want this, I want this, I want this. And sometimes you give them that, and it's not what's good for them. And they might not see it at the time. They might not see it looking back in 10 years. But hopefully we've got some wise people guiding the various parts of it that they'll get it more right than they get wrong. I mean, I didn't really answer your question, but that's why, again, it's not a simple answer.
No, you kind of did, and actually kind of set the stage for the next part of it, because I think it is time to redress that question. Your ship has sailed comment is very valid, and I'm going to use the kids analogy. Unscientifically, if I look at the YouTube comments, a lot of younger car enthusiasts dismiss professional racing because A, they think it's too political, they think it's too contrived and not authentic. And I wonder, and for example, I'm going to not pick on, but use an example, the last Grand Am race, where a Camaro is beating a Ferrari, where logic would say that Ferrari should have blown by. At some point in time, does show versus sport have to be discussed, and balance of performance comes into contrive this thing and negate that authenticity? I mean, I'm pushing for a position. I'm not trying to be controversial with you, but there's something here that just doesn't feel right for a lot of viewers that are negating pro racing.
Well, coming from a guy who's the only guy who races a car with less power than the production car, part of me says we should race them exactly how they come off the showroom floor. That's not realistic either. You have to be careful too at who you listen to. And it reminds me of Apple. Apple listened to their most vocal guys, the ones that were on the message boards and so forth. Who you really need to ask is you need to ask the people that aren't watching why they're not interested and so forth. Because some of the same charges you leveled against racing, political, this, that, and the other, if you dug into the UFC, you could probably make the same charges about who gets the fights and who doesn't and this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, the market's not wrong. And so you need to gauge off the needle. And if you're not happy with the audience, you need to make some changes. And, invariably, if you start making some changes, some of them go right at the core of what people believe the sport is. Some of them don't. Again, that's why you need smart people doing this stuff. And so, but if it's not working how you want, you need to make some changes. If it's generally speaking trending the way you want, you say, okay, we can make this better, but let's not do a knee jerk in exactly the other direction. So, it's tough. I think there's room for something that's a little less restricted and a little more, kind of run what you brung. And everybody says that, but the reality is that will probably not come out of a series that exists because the risks are too great to go that way. You're going to get some startup that's going to say, you know what? Like Bill Hughes out at Willow Springs out in the desert, who's going to say, I'm going to pay $100,000 to win, and there's 2 rules. It's got to have 4 wheels, and you get this much gas, and it's going to be something like that. It's ironic. I think the second most innovative series on the planet right now is Lemons Racing, because you've got this $500 limit. And you have everybody saying, you know what? I can game that. I can do this. I can do that. I can do that. So and my tongue's in my cheek a little bit, but we see what happens the other way. The argument about LMP1. They're the sexiest, most insane-looking cars, but there's 3 of them. So it's easy to spend other people's money, but the people that are spending the money, most of them are saying that's not worth it to us.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of manufacturer investment versus private teams, but I hear you loud and clear. I'm going to use that as a segue to a little bit of an update on Le Mans with your SRT Viper program. First of all, for you personally, professionally, how cool was it to be back?
Oh, it's hard to overstate. I mean, everything about that event is just bigger than everything else that we deal with. And on the global sports landscape, it's as big an event as there exists in the world. And it's cool to be a part of that. We were walking in the parade, I was with Kuno and Jonathan, and we're like, you know what's so cool about this? Is for once, everybody thinks this is as cool as we've always thought it was. We've played in empty houses before, and we still enjoy the challenge of trying to beat the guys we're racing with. But it's nice to see it celebrated in the same way we think about it. So to take part in that was huge. It's a tough event. This year was even tougher, with the way the race started out.
Yes.
Conditions. It was incredibly mentally taxing. And I was glad to hear afterwards that even the veterans felt the same way, because I didn't have a lot to compare it to, but it was tough.
If my notes are right, it tells me that the team kind of dropped you in the deep end. You were in the car in some very tough conditions, the ever-changing weather there at this year's Le Mans.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it goes. And, I've always liked, running in those kind of conditions. There was one situation in the night where it started raining and really should have been on wet tires, but for one reason or another, we stayed out on slicks, and it was just, they said, "Can you do it?" I said, I can do it. I'm not sure, A, it's smart, or B, we're going to not lose a lot of time. But I mean, that's just the way it goes. And it's sort of any driver that wants to be out there wants to be in the car when it's tough, or at least I've always felt that way. So, but it was a big ask, and it's you alternate between what the heck am I doing and this is what I live for, And so it was a cool event in that way, and some of it went the way we wanted, and some of it didn't.
So, not to stuff words in your mouth, but it was year one back. You got the cars to the finish. There were little niggling things through it all. What did SRT Viper learn from this year's Le Mans?
I mean, that's a 2-hour show on what we learned. So I think it's safe to say every single person, the teams have become so specialized, everyone has their job. And, from one guy that only worries about the transmission temperatures and so forth, or whatever. But everybody, the tire guys, everyone learned from it. Everyone went away from there saying, gosh, next year we'll pay attention to this, and we'll consider that, and we'll do it this way. And so every person in every single role learned and has a list of how they can do it better. I mean, tires is a big part of it, in terms of being on the right tires, not only for the dry, wet, intermediate, but also temperatures. In the past, when you don't, in the States, you run in about the same conditions, and the compound choice is pretty simple, but there it was it was a little more complicated, and because the laps are so long, when you do things right, the rewards are bigger. When you do them wrong, the penalties in terms of lap time and stuff is bigger. And so I think that's something that I for sure learned in terms of paying attention and understanding the tires maybe a little bit better.
So I understand that the WEC tire was different from your ALMS tire, compound, construction, something. Did that make a difference in your ability to get the car to work at Le Mans?
It's hard to say. We haven't gotten to the end of our development window and have total consistency on our part. So there's too many variables for us to assess that. We had some challenges, mainly because we didn't have much practice time deciding which direction we wanted to go setup wise. Whether some of it was due to the tires, I don't know. So it's hard to say. You'd be better off asking one of the teams with more experience like the vet guys.
So neither one of us are at Lime Rock. You're doing just the long distance races with SRT Viper, but they launched the GT3-R. Are you going to be involved in that program? I could see you as the perfect ambassador to work with the customer teams. Should I be filling out your resume for that, or?
Well, I mean, every one of us, all the drivers were there at the announcement, and I know every one of us was wondering, when am I going to get to drive that? So the World Challenge Series is one where that car is eligible, the GT3 stuff. So. And that would be closer to what I, spent most of my career doing in terms of the short race sprint format stuff. In my mind, that'd be a cool sort of supplement to the long distance races with the IMSA or the ALMS program.
Yep.
But they haven't discussed with us specifics on that. So, but I'm racking my brain thinking, who could I get that might be interested in buying one of those cars and going racing with it? Yeah. So it's got my wheels turning for sure. Beautiful, sexy piece.
Yeah, it's awesome, cool, and I know Viper Nation will love it. Is the GT3-R also eligible for GTD in the USCR?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think so too. Okay. Let's talk a little bit, and not to be controversial, give me the insider update on this consolidation of ALMS, Grand Am into USCR. Have you heard anything from your side? How should a fan be taking what's going on? Because it's been somewhat quiet, but I don't know, maybe behind the scenes there's dialogue going on with the teams and such.
Well, I mean, in GT, where we are, GTE, if you will, I mean, it's basically crossing over unchanged. So I think, we're the lucky ones. I think overall, I did talk to some people that are trying to figure out what to run. There's a good bit of that. But I think this shows you've got different tastes and opinions on how to do it. And I think what they've done is they've conducted inventory of as many of the ideas and preferences, and they've tried to incorporate as many as they can. How well they did in terms of assimilating that into the rules package and the classes, we'll know at Daytona next year. But I suspect we're going to have, just a ton of really, really good cars.
But let's be clear for our viewers, either racing fan or new ones. The way it stands right now, the die has been cast. WEC will not be merging races with USCR, where an Audi, for example, came and used Sebring as a test because the P1 category existed. That's not true. There's no P1 category in 14. And the two entities, WEC and USCR, are kind of going their separate ways, with the exception of GTE-LM. I get that part in P2. But there's no real crossover here. We're not going to see Toyotas and Audis and new Porsches racing in USCR races. And we're not going to see Sebring at this juncture or Daytona become something part of the WEC series. This is not a test of Leo, but that's what we're hearing. Am I relatively accurate to make sure our fans understand that?
That's the way I understand it.
Yeah.
There's no place for an LMP1 car at Daytona or Sebring.
Okay. Enough about what I'm thinking. Anything on your mind to end this little rant?
Well, I'm actually heading up to Charlotte. I'm going to be doing Wind Tunnel Sunday Night Live, and it reminds me, August 17th is the end of an era. As we know, Speed Channel is becoming Fox Sports 1, and so, from someone that has a Speed Vision jacket and had some of my Trans Am races televised by them, it's sad. I know a lot of the racing coverage will continue on Fox Sports 1 in terms of some of the existing contracts. And I see, with some of the other networks getting involved, NBC Sports picking up Formula One and IndyCar. It's good to see racing taking up more of the spectrum. Those of us that can't get enough of it are gonna miss Speed Channel. And, for guys like Dave Despain and a lot of the people that have been part of our lives for a long time, I hope they find other homes, and just like to thank them for their contributions.
Well, I'm going to go all the way back to remembering a friend of mine, Terry Lingner, how this whole thing started. Yes, big fan of Dave Despain, watch the news. And then I'm going to give you prop, you little savvy bastard, for showing up on ShakeDown as those racing shows go away and we continue. So, man, you're like a cockroach. You just end up on your feet all the time.
Yeah, I'm like one of those bacteria that's resistant to antibiotics. Somehow I find a way to survive. But
now you're our bacteria, so we love it. Thank you again. I'm sure we'll see you at the track soon. Thank you for doing TrackDown from what isn't a track. But we'll show pictures of Lime Rock and it'll all be good. Tommy, thank you for the time. Catch up with you, okay?
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks.